Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this ASFP webinar on BSI Identify and the Code for Construction Product Information being supported by the ASFP. We're just waiting for a few more people to attend and then we'll kick off. So just wait a few moments. Okay, we've waited a little while and we'll now start the webinar. So I'm going to chair the webinar today. My name is Niall Rowan. I'm Technical and Regulatory Affairs Officer for the Association for Specialist Fire Protection. And then talking about BSI Identify will be Will Johnson Marshall, who's Head of Operational Delivery at BSI. And then talking about the Code for Construction Products Information will be Philip Sayer, and he's Head of Assurance and Challenge. So how today will work is as follows. Welcome to the webinar, as you see that. You will also have on your screens, you'll be able to get exercise, put questions in the Q&A box and put chat in the chat box. We would ask you to put questions in the question box and not in the chat box, please. So that makes it easier because then I can record all the questions and make note, and then at the end when we have the Q&A session, I can either forward them to Philip or to William as appropriate. So then we have the Q&A and then we'll sum up at the end. Now, the good news is this webinar has continuing professional development accreditation available through IFE, that's the Institution of Fire Engineers. So we get 1 point you get if you wish to have some CPD from this webinar. So very, very quick bit of history and the need for culture change following the Grenfell fire. We've run a number of webinars and there have been a number of people coming. So we look at a number of regulatory changes. Of course, the biggest news is the Building Safety Act. We got royal assent last week. And also the Fire Safety Act is also coming into force. Fire Safety Act modifying the regulatory reform Fire Safety Order and the Building Safety Act with a whole new building regime for high-risk buildings and a new regulation and everything else. Far too much to go into now and not time for here. But one of the things that came out of Grenfell was Dame Judith Hackett issued a report called Building a Safety Future, where she was asked to review the whole of the regulatory scheme. And, you know, as well as the culture change, one thing she identified was the way products are tested and marketed leave something to be desired. And she introduced something called the golden thread, which has been picked up, which is a golden thread of information on fire and structural safety, which will accompany products and the buildings for its life cycle from creation from the client right through to the architect, to the main contractor, the subcontractor, and building, and the end users of the building. The golden thread of information. There's a lot of information about what that is, and two important facts. One is BSI Identify, which William's going to talk about any minute now, and the other one is the Code for Construction Product Information. So without further ado, I'm going to pass control to William, who's now going to talk about BSI Identify. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niall. Just to check, can you see my slides okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, good afternoon, and thanks to Niall and Georgina for arranging today's session and for all the participants for joining. My name is Will Johnson Marshall. I'm Head of Operational Delivery at BSI Identify. I work within the national standards body part of BSI, where we share knowledge, foster innovation, and support our UK stakeholders to adopt best practice. And just to reiterate as well, the questions, please put them in the Q&A. We're going to run through both of the presentations and then pick up at the end. So do make a note of them as they crop up as we go through the slides. So first of all, I'd like to just start with a bit of a challenge for you, and what might sound like a straightforward question, I guess. If you look at this picture of an office, it's like, you know, what a nice bright office. Do you know what construction products has been used to make this space? Now, for some of the products, that might be a straightforward thing to answer. So, you know, you can see the lights, you might have an idea about the flooring. But then what about things like the heating and ventilation and air conditioning systems, or the fire stopping or insulation that's been used? Can be a bit harder to understand quite what has been used within the makeup of a building. So if you have got the job of a facilities manager and you needed to put in place an appropriate maintenance regime, you know, you need to know what the products are. If you're the person who is the asset owner and you've commissioned the building of the asset, the construction of the asset, how would you know whether the products that you were expecting to be in there, those that were specified, are actually the ones that have been used in the construction? And if they're not, you know, does the building, is it going to meet the energy performance expectations that you might have for that asset? And so assets can have hundreds, thousands, you know, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of products within them. And, you know, something like a safety recall, how would you know in that situation which of those products was subject to a safety recall? So obviously not expecting you to have the answer to that. That's what we're here to talk to you about today. First of all, though, let's look at what information is available to us. So there's likely to be you know, a reasonable amount of information. We might start by looking at a product to see if there's a label on it, which may have some CE marking, or you know, where we're going to move to UK conformity assessments marks on there. There could be declarations of conformity or other third-party certification information that might be available. Some of that could be within the O&M or the buildings manual, and for some assets, they will have specified a requirement to capture key design information from BS 8587, or handover information from BS 7.3. That's not always the case. It's only if it would have been specified at the outset. There should also be a health and safety file, which has information and as-built drawings of the building with the CDM regulations. And as we move towards responding to the golden thread, that will also give us another requirement, you know, another source of information. And when we're talking about information, there's sort of 2 points to that for me. One is information about what the products are, and then secondly, it's information about how you effectively use, install, maintain, replace the products that are in an asset. So thinking about the information and all the places in this sort of the life cycle of an asset, this is a diagram that sort of represents those stages. So we've got a design, build, operate, but the starting point at the top there is the source of the majority of product information, which would be the manufacturers of the product. So they generally, the manufacturer will be the authority for the information about the product. You may think for product certification that the certification body that's been used is an authority there as well. But generally speaking, it's the manufacturer who's responsible, at least for the information about the product. Now, the designers and specifiers will need to access that information to make their design choices in order to put together a specification that's going to meet the requirements that they want to achieve with the asset. And so they may need access to information. Are products available? What's their performance expectation for the product? We then move into the build phase, and information is needed by the constructor to know what products they're expecting, what are the products that have arrived on site, do they match those that were specified. If products aren't available, then they'll perhaps need access to information to manage a substitution, to make sure that they're choosing substitute products that have comparable performance to the ones that were initially specified. So information is needed during that build phase. And then when we move to completion and we're creating handover, then that information is sort of pulled together. You know, some may come from the specification phase, some may come from the construction. But is it going to be comprehensive? It may conflict. There may be gaps in it. And then that information is then passed on and used and referenced within the management of the in-life phase. So information is I guess, product information, what products and the information to support it is pretty essential, really, across all phases of an asset's life. So that information, if we just have a think for a minute about how we ensure that we get access to accurate product information. So unfortunately, the supply chain isn't always simple. You know, it's not always the fact that a manufacturer will sell directly. Many do, but also there are supply chains involved in getting products out to market. So the manufacturer might work with distributors, aggregators and suppliers. And each one of those, actually, they may create an additional identifier. So there can be confusion around even something which you might think is straightforward around an ID for a product, because products can accumulate identifiers. So that information then comes in the form of databases, documents, data sheets, library objects, BIM object, and they get distributed to users, made available to users. However, in that scenario of a more complicated supply chain, the manufacturer may provide it out to their distributors, and then it could be the distributors that provide that onto the users. So you get this sort of multitude of distribution. And if something's updated, how does the user, the owners, consultants, contractors, maintainers, how do they access the information, but also how do they know that they're accessing accurate and the most up-to-date information? And I think what I'm saying here is that it's not always the case that information that people are using will necessarily be the most up-to-date or easy to access. And in fact, you know, there is a cost of this. It's not just nice to have. It's a real source of inefficiency. And there's a survey here commissioned by Autodesk that's put a global number of $1.8 trillion. Obviously that's global, but if we look at the percentage here, so 14% of rework. Obviously we've got the global number, but you know, if you think about 14% or thereabouts of everything we do in terms of rework being down to poor information, then it is a significant inefficiency. So that research concludes that adopting a data strategy can eliminate many avoidable costs in construction. And some of the lead causes digging into that, 24% down to inaccurate or incorrect data, missing data, 24%, and maybe even worse than missing data, wrong data, 21% as a contributor to overall bad project data. Another real life example, this was a building a few years ago in Plymouth University, and hailed when it was opened, I think by the Duke of Edinburgh back then, as being a real modern construction. However, they discovered shortly after the building was completed that a lot of the windows had been installed the wrong way round, which caused that rework. And could there be something simple of the installer having rapid access to an installation video? That could have been something that might have avoided that costly error. So where does that take us to? So BSI has been working with industry, and we've created a solution called BSI Identify, which we think is a groundbreaking digital solution that helps overcome issues around product identification, verification, and traceability challenges in the built environment supply chain. What we do with BSI Identify is establish an unambiguous digital link between a product and its supporting information. There's a single gateway to enable manufacturers to update and maintain access to the latest information, ensuring quick identification and permanent access to information about their products throughout the lifespan of the asset in which those products are. So that's what we have. What we've done is built BSI Identify on top of an established technology called Digital Object Identifier technology, which is codified within an ISO standard, ISO 26324. And this approach has been widely adopted within some other domains, so within academia and the entertainment supply chain. Actually, BSI use this approach within all of our technical standards publications. They all have a DOI system-based identifier that enables us to identify and link our standards publications together. But within the entertainment world, it really underpins that industry. So people like Disney, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Miramax, ESPN, all rely on this to identify the assets, the digital assets that they create when they produce movies and TV. And it has been proven to help them in their sort of data exchange within their supply chain. So the technology is robust, it's proven, it's scalable. Last year, there were over 10 billion resolutions of these identifiers. So we've chosen this robust technology for us. And it also offers us confidence that this is an approach that's going to work across these maybe decades-long time span of a built asset. So what we have then is we've created a digital link. So our UPIN identifier can live within digital records of a building. Maybe it's an asset management system. And when all products within a building are captured in that way, that will enable the industry to quickly send queries to find latest information, whether that's just to answer whether any products have a recall, or to find maintenance information, or to check availability, or to find replacement products. And it'll enable people either on site or walking around a building to be able to know what the products are within their space. So it's designed to sit within the growing move towards becoming a more digital industry. But the ID can also provide a link from the physical product, whether that's on the packaging or marked in some way on the product itself. And the draft construction product regulations contain a requirement for manufacturers to ideally label their products, but if not, label their packaging with details of who they are and what the product is. So the UPIN ID can be a quick way to solve that as well. So a digital link, and also can be used as a physical link. What I'd like to do now is let you sort of try this out, I guess. So if any of you have got your phones, if you can get that and open your camera, this is a QR code, which is a real example of a UPIN that's been generated for a product. I'll just give you a few seconds to hopefully point your camera at the screen, and then you should be given the option to follow a link which will resolve the UPIN ID that's contained within this QR code and take you through to the page of information. And this is what it looks like. So we've got some product data, we've got information to other resources that help the use of the product. We've got classification, got information about who the manager is, who the manufacturer is. So hopefully you've seen that. What I'd like to do now is just play a short 3-minute video from the Chief Executive of Cider Eyes, this manufacturer, to hear his thoughts on the approach.
One of the challenges for the construction industry is to ensure that the products that are specified are the products that are installed, and to be able to have certainty that the correct product has gone into place. The number of times what you see on a drawing is not reflected in what you see in a building. BSI Identify is a way of providing a lifetime marking on a product which somebody can access, that will immediately take them to the technical data sheet for that product with all of the information that they will require, and that information stands for a lifetime. Cider Eyes are the market leader in cavity barriers. It's all around passive fire protection for the building envelope. So in principle, we're here to understand how fire moves around the outside of a building. When we heard about BSI Identify, we were delighted to be able to get involved as an early adopter and innovator in the programme. For me, it was a complete no-brainer. It takes away all that uncertainty about, I've got this cavity barrier in front of me, it's got black tape on it, I'm not sure if this goes here or there, I'm not sure if this is the right one that I need for what I'm doing today. You just scan the QR code, you can see exactly what it is, you can see exactly what the application is, you get complete traceability of the product and complete visibility of all of the technical information. You might be 15 stories up a building on a cherry picker and you can zap the product and you know straight away what you've got in front of you. Prior to BSI Identify becoming an option, phone used to ring a lot. A lot of customers ringing us asking us for information, and we have a very detailed archive system. We would spend hours and hours and hours sifting through to try and find what product had been supplied on particular sites. But now we've got BSI Identify, it couldn't be easier. It takes them immediately to the data sheet for that product and they can see for themselves all of the information they require at that time. When I first mentioned to the management team that we wanted to get involved in the BSI Identify programme, you could see our manufacturing director eyes roll a little. But when we actually tackled the problem, it was really, really simple. We simply had to take all of the different tapes that we use on our product and print a QR code on them. It was great to get the product first in on the rolls and see the first off the line and everybody running over with their scanners on the phone and clicking it, and immediately that information coming up on the product. It was a really good moment. Even the manufacturing director was pleased. We find ourselves at a time in the industry when there's an enormous amount of change going on. It's really important that the people who use construction product information can trust the information in front of them. The sooner that we can get to the stage where every manufacturer uses BSI Identify, the better. The sooner we can get to the stage where therefore every product on site has a QR code and everybody involved in the selection, installation, maintenance, checking of the products knows exactly what's got in front of them, the better. This has to be something for the whole industry, not just the innovators.
Okay, so hopefully that was good, and I'm just going to talk very briefly about back to the some of the context around. So Niall mentioned at the start the response to Grenfell. So within the Building a Safer Future report, the initiative that we were working on that has become BSI Identify is referenced within that, and a couple of the recommendations talk about consistent labelling and traceability system, and a unique identification code as being things that should be created for the industry. As the regulations start to go through and come into effect, requirement for golden thread for those high risk products will need to be something that the industry responds to. And we're going to hear from Philip after the presentation about the CCPI and their work to improve the information that is put together by manufacturers. And as BSI Identify, we think that as a solution that can help manufacturers in their work to meet a number of the clauses that are required for CCPI. So just thinking back to that sort of supply chain life cycle, what we have now with BSI Identify is quick and ambiguous identification of any product, permanent access to product information throughout the life cycle of the asset, with a web-enabled link from either the physical product or a digital record, and a central publicly accessible location for manufacturers to maintain product information. So if anyone is interested, please get in touch and we can talk about that more. But I'm going to stop there and hand over to Philip.
Yes, it's now time for Philip to talk about the Code for Construction Products Information. So with no ado, I will hand over to Philip, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Niall. Thanks, Will. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm just getting my screen up so I can see what I can see. Hopefully you can see the slides now. Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about CCPI, give you a little bit of background about the journey to get to a code, an overview of what the code includes, and a little bit about what you can expect if you register and for the verification process and journey. And finally, talk a little about what next and the fee structures associated with verification. Yeah. So the code itself was the result of Dame Judith Hackett's report, obviously, and which resulted out of the Grenfell fire. And the Construction Product Association, CPA, set up a group in 2019, the Marketing Integrity Group, to look at how the CPA should respond to, and the industry should respond to, with regards to construction product, the findings of Dame Judith Hackett's report. And they set out with an initial call for evidence in 2019, which then resulted in the writing of the Code for Construction Product Information and publication of that for consultation in around March time 2021. So the consultation went from March to May in 2021, and that involved a very large part of the industry, so 28 trade associations and 7 other member bodies, which represented 37,000 individual members. and the consultation received 180 responses, which were broadly supportive of the Code for Construction Product Information. And following that consultation and the feedback, there was a process that went through to edit it, make it clearer and more understandable, to address some of the concerns that were identified during the consultation, and a legal review for the code. And that was then handed over to CCPI Limited, who are the administrators of the code now, and also the assurance process and verification body. CCPI Limited itself is an independent, not-for-profit organisation. It's independent because it has an independent board. Nobody from CPA is involved in that board, although there are members of one member of the Market Integrity Group who is a board member, who was also the co-chair or deputy chair of the MIG, Catherine Fife. So it's important to understand with the code what the actual code is intended to do and what product information verification means. And there is some element and some evidence that people are a little bit confused about what the code actually does. So just to be very clear, the code does not test any products, make any recommendations about construction product standards, manufacturing systems, or management systems associated with manufacturing controls to develop construction products. It makes no assessment of construction product performance, and it doesn't recommend any changes to construction products. What the code does do is it verifies the manufacturer's employees' perceptions and practices and against known cultural indicators to ensure that the process for creating and publishing product information is done rigorously and with integrity. It does check that there's a management system that meets all 11 clauses of the code to ensure that product information is robustly developed in accordance with the code. It does ensure that the product information that's published by manufacturers, by corroborating that product information through an assurance process, that it is clear, accurate, up-to-date and accessible, and meets the requirements of the code. And it does check again on a sampling basis that product information and performance claims made in product information is consistent with any certification, classification or testing undertaken by the manufacturer. So in order to start to get verification for the code, an organization a manufacturer has to register with CCPI Limited. That's done at a brand level. So if you're an organization with a hierarchy, a company hierarchy, it's essential that that organization registers at the brand level, closely associated with the products that you want to verify. You cannot register as your global organization and cover all your brands. Each one has to be done independently. Once you've registered, the assessment process then opens. There's a 5-step process, 2 processes essentially for the manufacturer and 2 verification activities. The manufacturer's processes are in the blue boxes. So essentially step 1 and 2, which is the leadership and culture survey and the management systems questionnaire or submission, they can be done simultaneously. You don't have to do them one after the other as it sort of pictorial indicates here. But they can be done simultaneously. Those 2 pieces of evidence, once submitted by the manufacturer, then go through a verification process, which we call the organizational assessment. And that assessment ensures, as I said earlier on, that there is a certain level of cultural maturity within your organization to assure that your processes are robustly followed, and also that your management system processes are aligned with and meet the requirements of, or the 11 clauses of, the Code for Construction Product Information. Assuming that those minimum expectations are met, the product set submission process opens up. And what that means is that you're then in a position to be able to submit individual product sets for verification, which for us is corroborating evidence. It's the evidence that corroborates your leadership and culture and your management systems are actually enacted and implemented for the information that you provide regarding your products. And the final stage then is to verify that corroborating evidence that's provided against the code, and eventually provide a verification mark for your product. It's important to note here that there is no recognition for registration with CPI. The only recognition you get is where you get verification for your product, and then the CPI mark can only be used against the verified product sets. It's not a generic mark that you can use, like, for example, a BSI 9001 or 45001 certification. When you register, you'll be asked to identify a code lead, and the code lead is essentially responsible for ensuring that all the steps in the verification process are met, and working with CCPI and the CCPI verifier to help progress that process. So there are a number of steps in there that have to be undertaken, and a single point of contact is really useful to make sure that the organization maintains focus and can drive the verification assessment process forwards. This is probably the most useful slide you'll see today, certainly from my perspective anyway. This broadly sets out a very clear overview of the code itself. So it's structured into 4 elements: information creation, core information, associated information, and support and competence. And within those 4 elements, there are 11 clauses that you'll be familiar with. And those 11 clauses are then verified by CCPI either through management systems assessment or corroborating evidence of your product set. And those 2 items are clearly identified against the different clauses there. So some clauses will get a management system and a corroborating evidence check. So if we just take clause 1, for example, that you have a documented sign-off process for product information, we will look to ensure that you have a documented process for that, who should do it, whether it be a particular role or a particular person. And then through corroborating evidence, we'll check that that person has actually reviewed that document and signed it off, and it is the right person with the right authorities. And we'll also check against clause 11 to ensure that that person is competent and has completed the relevant training as set out in your own competency process. Some elements will only require corroboration. So, for example, clauses 4 and 5, and indeed 6, they will just be through corroborating evidence. So clause 4 requires that if you have any test certification relating to product performance, then you submit that to us. We will then check that certification and the relevant standard that you are certified to, and make sure that your product information doesn't make any performance claims that are either out with the certification, or indeed that the performance claims you do make are consistent with the standards. So that's how it works between management systems and corroborating evidence, and how we use those items. There is one area that specifically uses the leadership and culture survey to ensure that what's being done is appropriate. And that's around ensuring that all communications relating to product information are consistent with the product information itself and with the standard. Now, clearly, it's very easy to do from a written perspective and through your web links, but for example, what your salesman might be saying when they're out selling products, etc., or your customer service advisors are saying, that's more difficult to test. So we do that through the leadership and culture survey by asking a specific question around whether or not people are free to give information which isn't already approved or verified. So just a little more about the leadership and culture survey, because this is quite unique in an assurance process. Most assurance activities and verification activities would not use a leadership and culture survey as part of it. But as we'll know from Dame Judith Hackett's report, improving the leadership and culture within an organisation is a key priority to ensure that the likes of Grenfell doesn't happen again. So what we're doing here is we're testing the cultural maturity within your organization to make sure that what you say you do is actually done. It's done through a survey with a number of statements in it, a total of 84 across 9 particular areas. We test that against all seniority levels, anybody that can influence construction product and communicates information about or product information. It's also followed up by structured validation interviews to validate what we've been told and what we're seeing within the survey responses. And the responders submit their responses on what we call a Likert scale. So that's from strongly disagree through to strongly agree, with a don't know in there as well. And that tells us about the perceptions within the organization, and then we can test those against the requirements of the code. It is a representative sample. You can see that on the screen there. So generally the maximum number of people that you'd have to submit for an organization would be 60 and a minimum of 20. Below 25 employees, we'll look for a 75% representation of employees. And again, it's across all levels, all functions, and all manufacturing sites. Any and all survey responses are anonymous to the manufacturer, but we obviously know who's responded, so we can do validation interviews. The management system submission can be done at the same time, so that's where we'll ask you to submit your control procedures around the 11 clauses of the code. So typically they'll be around how you manage your product information, how you sign it off, how you ensure it's updated, how you change it and that process for change. Also training. So what is your competency matrix, your training requirements and your training registers? All those types of things will be submitted as part of the management system submission. Your management system might be something you've developed separately or is already included in your ISO 9001 certification process. That's perfectly fine. All you need to do is submit the relevant sections to product information. We won't be looking for all of your ISO 9001 certified management system to be submitted to us. So once those submissions have been made, we undertake an analysis and an assessment of them and provide a narrative report around the results of the leadership and culture survey, an assessment against the procedures and standards that you've submitted to us with regards to meeting the 11 clauses of the code. We actually only test clause 1, 2, 3, and 7 because they're the ones that require documented information, written controls, if you like. For the code, all the other clauses are tested through the addition of corroborating evidence, in other words, your product set submission. And there's a set of minimum criteria that we require an organization to meet in terms of cultural maturity and compliance with the code itself. Having done that, we then open up the product set submission. It's useful to understand what a product set is. So it can either be a grouping of similar products fulfilling a common purpose. We don't take into account different sizes or color, except where those affect the performance, or it's a grouping of dissimilar products which form a system or kit fulfilling a defined function. So that might be a roofing structure or a window system or something like that. All your products that are included within that system or kit must be included in the submission. And the other thing we look at and we use to test and in our assurance process to do more in-depth assurance, if you like, safety critical products is a knowledge of the risk rating of the product or the safety critical product. For us, these are essentially products that would, if failed, cause harm or death. And that's our basic definition at the moment. Essentially, that means that anything that has a structural fire protection function, they would be considered a safety critical product. So those will include things like structural elements, steelwork, block work, roofs, external cladding systems and materials, fire suppression, retardation products and systems. So, for example, fire doors, but not internal fire doors without a fire rating, fire stops, and intumescent materials. So those are all the sorts of things that are included in the safety critical products from a CPI perspective. All other construction products are considered non-safety critical. We are open to having discussions about whether or not your product is safety critical or not, and verifying that with you before you start your product set submission. You'll then be asked to submit details about your product sets. So who's responsible for signing it off and verifying your product set. You can also have multiple product set submissions at a time, although in the first phase, we're only looking for one product set to come through. We will require you to submit any classification or testing or industry approved standards that you hold, self-declarations of performance, product information that customers can see. So normally we'll ask for your URL or your website, warranty and guarantee information, and details of competency requirements, etc. And all those are clearly laid out in the code. Having done that, we will then undertake a random sample of your product set information submitted. The sampling size will be representative, so it depends on how many products you have in your product set. We'll determine what size of sample we take. And following that sample and testing, we will then complete another report, which will particularly focus on clauses 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10. We'll also include the first initial report or the organizational assessment in that, and we'll make a final determination as to whether or not your product should be verified. If the verification is confirmed, you will then receive a verification mark. This is actually the old one at the bottom here on the right-hand side, but is a uniquely number to that product set. So you can only use it with that product set. Verification fees. So the fees come in two separate phases. So the first one is for the registration and organizational assessment. That's valid for up to 2 years. It's paid in advance, and it's based on the turnover of an organization. And then there's a second fee for product set verification, and that is dependent on how many product sets you submit, how many products are in your product set, and also the risk rating of it. So if it's safety critical, then it takes us more time to do it. Again, the product verification fee is valid for up to 2 years. There is a sort of implied discount if you submit more than one product, and that's because there's often products sitting, particularly with systems, across multiple systems. And of course, you must maintain a current registration in order to continue to use the unique verification mark. There will be a self-declaration 1 year in to say that nothing's changed. That's done by the registered manufacturer. And then at the end of a 2-year period, there's a re-registration and a new verification fee. And what we would say to you is that if your registration ends in January, then you need to be thinking and resubmitting information in sort of October, November, so that we can go through the verification or organizational assessment to ensure that you maintain that registration and your verification marks remain current. So finally, what next? So we're opening up the registrations in a number of waves. That's through a pledge process. We've already received pledges and commitments for the first wave of registrations. The second and third waves will open sequentially once we get going. If you want more information, you can find that on our webpage, www.cpicode.org.uk. There is a particular document there, which is, the code's there, code and guidance, and there's also a document preparing for the code, which covers all the information in these slides. There's also an FAQ section, so it's quite good to look there. If you can't find the answer to your questions on the FAQs, then please email us at inquiries@cpicode.org.uk. And that's it for me. I shall stop sharing and hand back to Niall. And thanks very much for listening. I don't know whether we've lost Niall. It just seems to be Will and I right now.
If I turn my video and sound on, it even helps even better. You should see a slide with a question and answer sign on it.
It's not up at the moment, but
Sorry?
it's not up at the moment, Niall.
Okay, all right. Let's just try that. Let's try that one. That'll do. Is that better?
There we go.
Right, okay. Right, well, thank you very much for those two interesting presentations and two quite different approaches to it. We only have a couple of questions that have come in during the webinar, but we'll go through those. And they were during William's presentation, so I'll give him first shot at them. And it was a question when early on in your presentation, William, when you were talking about the different types of information that were used, that manufacturers and other producers were producing information. And a question, it was a kind of open question, what about fire safety engineering file? Now, are these used as part of BSI Identify, or does BSI Identify fit into them?
Yes, yeah, so I think that was the slide at the start where it was sort of illustrating some of the ways in which information is currently collected together, and I think yeah, it's a good point really. So depending on the type of asset, there'll be different forms of evidence that are needed, and yeah, the fire safety file, that's a good example, and we'll look to add that in to our slide, you know, as something that will help there. So yeah, so I guess on that one, I think it's just more a thanks for flagging that.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that. There's always one person who's always got something that you've got missed out on those. Right. So same question also asked, also during your presentation. Are the collection, study, approval and availability of product and assemblies to be used part of the consultants and engineers' job? I would have thought that was the designer's job as well. But I'm going to give you a shot at that first, William, but then Philip might want to have a word about that as well. So what do you reckon, Philip? Is the collection, study, approval and availability of products part of the consultants and engineers' job?
Yeah, so if I just go first. So it possibly depends on, you know, some different factors there. If you're working in the private sector, I'd have thought the expectation is that the consultant engineer would specify something that would be suitable and available. You know, they should have checked that their spec can be fulfilled. If it's in the public sector, it's perhaps more likely to be a performance specification, so something, you know, using the language equal or approved. So in that scenario, they would only need to check that a suitable product exists, and then leave it to the contractor to solve. You know, and obviously it would be a bit of a fail if something was recommended that wasn't available.
Okay, do you have anything to add to that, Philip?
Yeah, so from a manufacturer's perspective for the code, and our experience through the pilot study was that there's sort of a dual role here between technical or design functions and the marketing functions that will collect data together and approve that data. And they need to work closely together in order to collect that information and submit it into the portal that we have for collecting information. So it's not unique to say it's either or, an engineer's job or the marketing job from a manufacturer's point of view. It's generally a combined role, and that's why we've said that, you know, the code lead should either be a senior person in design or a senior person in marketing to lead that process.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question's come in while we've been discussing the first two, but I think it's a fairly straightforward one, and it's about BSI Identify again. Can the QR code be embedded into the BIM model? That's the question that's come in for that.
Okay, yeah, good. Another good question there. So, so the UPIN identifier would be the thing, and yes, it's designed to work with all sort of software, all of the digital tools that are there. What we're doing as BSI Identify is we're starting to work with the software providers with the aim of them adding in a data field so that people can start to store the UPIN within exactly things like the BIM model that's been asked. We also know that some of the objects, the library objects or BIM objects, as they're sometimes called, that contain information about a product, can be quite heavy in terms of the amount of data that's within them. And what we think is that if the UPIN ID is starts to be used, then that will take away the need to put quite so much information in, and the UPIN could be used as a way to help sort of data exchange to connect to the richer information that somebody may require along the path somewhere, or to update information that's in an object that perhaps goes out of date. So yeah, that sort of digital space is definitely something that we've designed Identify to work with, but we'll sort of need some partnerships with those software providers to get it integrated.
And I was just saying software providers plural because of the different BIM models that exist. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. There aren't any more questions and answers. So I think it's just really down to me to wrap up again. Thank you very much, Philip Sayer, to talking about the code for construction product information. And thanks also to Will Johnson Marshall for talking about BSI Identify, which is a very exciting initiative. We know some ASFP members, indeed Adam Turk on your video is an ASFP member, and they've used it. And I've actually been around their factory and seen it all being put on and everything else. So just to sum up, and there should be a bit more, a reminder again that if you wish to have 1 hour of CPD or 1 point of CPD, if you send an email to info@asfp.org.uk, then you'll get those for all those who are attending. We also are now doing a number of webinars, and look, we have a QR code. You see, we have the technology as well. I even checked that it works while you were talking. I thought it'd be terrible if I put that up and it didn't work. Well, it does work. So anyway, okay, all right. So I think that's everything else, and that's pretty much all I have to say. So thank you very much for all attending. And I hope you have a very good afternoon, and I thought you found that interesting. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.